My name is Jacob, and I am reading Your by Sylvia Plath. The reason that I chose Sylvia Plath is because she's my personal favorite poet, and I already had a book with this poem in it, Ariel. It's a pretty good collection. A lot of good poems in there, obviously, with her classic Lady Lazarus being in there. I believe only a few pages after this one. For Sylvia Plath, a lot of the writing that she tends to write about is about three specific things that you'll find. The first being one of the most famous things about her is her history with her mental illness and her depression. She has a few poems about her time in an asylum, and obviously a few about her depression, a few takes on that. The second of that being her children, which is what I personally believe this poem is about, and I'll come to describe that more in just a moment. And then the third thing being her relationship with her family. Another famous poem that she has written is Daddy. I've read a little bit about her history. She has one of the most famous deaths. Going back to how this poem is about her child, I can start off by saying that your, right here, is not only the first word of the sentence continuing on, but it's a very important part of the poem because you can tell that it's a description of her child. Every one of these sentences that she says talks about her child, and you can tell that by, I don't know if it works for every sentence. I don't believe this one right here all lines very well, but you can see that a lot of these sentences end with a period where you can sort of fill in the blank at the first sentence as you're vague as a fog and looked for like mail. You're farther off than Australia, because this is a description of her child while she is still pregnant and dealing with childbirth. And you'll see that easily as we go along, that a lot of these descriptions right here, you can see Jumpy's a Mexican bean, when the child kicks in the womb. A lot of these are descriptions of a child during pregnancy. Specifically, if we go along starting from the top, you're clown like, happiest on your hands, feet to the stars. That the clown like, I believe, is just a reference to the goofiness of a child. But happiest on your hands, feet to the stars is a reference to how a child is upside down during the latest parts of pregnancy, with their head towards the bottom of the earth, and then feet to the stars, as is shown. Happiest on your hands, I imagine, is another reference to almost like handstanding. Moon scold, I'm not entirely certain what that means right there. I don't fully know. My belief is it just sounds like a very young sort of description, but that is also just me making things up. I don't know what that means. Gild like a fish is also another reference like that. I remember I did read when I was going through this book that Gild like a fish was sort of another reference to that youth and the how early on the child was in development. Now, a lot of these poems have these little bits of interesting language. I mean, I believe when this book was written, and I'm going to double check this right now, it was way early on in the 1965. That does leave me a little bit of a 80-year gap in language, and I have no idea what Dodo's mode means. Dodo being a sort of dumb kind of bird that's gone extinct. A common sense, obviously, relating to that, but moving on, you'll see wrapped up in yourself like a spool, trolling your dark as owls do. I imagine that the spool is a reference to the umbilical cord, and trolling your dark as owls do is some sort of reference to the darkness of the womb. A lot of these are just very much brute references to the fact that this child is developing in the womb. For trawling your dark as owls do, I have the definition of the word troll right here. The definition, troll being a verb, is fish with a troll net or signs. I imagine that might be in reference to owls hunting in the dark for animals. A baby in the womb is doing, I'm certain, a wonderful job at hunting for animals. But moving around is likely the reference for that. In the womb, kicking, anything like that. That the writer would have been able to experience as a pregnant woman. The mute as a turnip from the 4th of July to All Fool's Day, oh, high riser, my little loaf. Little loaf is a reference to the sort of experience with a baby in the womb. But mute as a turnip from the 4th of July, this specifically, I believe, relates to then the idea further on as vague as fog and looked for like mail. I believe that might be a reference to the sort of ignorance of the world in a sense. You know, you're vague as fog and looked for like mail. I believe it's sort of a clueless sort of searching, uncertain of what it's like outside in the world that Sylvia Plath has to deal with, you know, and a lot of strife going on and trouble. This sort of ignorance is obviously a very innocent sort of unbenign idea of a baby. This is something that she talks a lot about, beyond the idea of Jumpy as a Mexican bean, which I believe is just a very cute sentence. But then it goes on to a clean slate with your own face on, which might refer again to the idea of innocence and ignorance in the world at such a young age, where this woman herself has had to deal with so much mentally. She's holding a child that has done with nothing, has had none of those experiences, just kind of a wiggly kind of movie baby. For a sprat, like a sprat in a pickle jug, I will say that that is a highly active small oily fish. I had to look that one up, which sounds sort of like the baby being in the pickle jug of a womb, enjoying the delights of all that is there. So going from the fish to the eel, a creel of eels, all ripples, is just enjoying the sort of internal relaxation of her own mother. I believe that she of course loves her child. That is an obvious thing. Jumpy as a Mexican bean, I still think is one of the cutest line you can write about your baby. Clown like, happiest in your hands, feast the stars, moon's gold, and gild like a fish. All a very positive message towards this child, but referring back to mute as a turnip from the 4th of July to Fool's Day, to in vague as a fog, that doesn't feel like a very positive message she's trying to send to her baby. She's not dawdling over it with these words. It's more of a mere like analysis of what this child is compared to everything else that is going on in her life, everything else that she sees, her time in an asylum or her time in like severe depression. A lot of that comes to this sort of reference of that. And I'm just repeating myself a bit, but that's a lot of what this poem is. It's going back and forth between this positive analysis of the child to referring to it as some sort of dodo bird and a mute as a turnip or clueless, like unknowing of what's going on, you know, further off than Australia from the world at hand. But then going back to these little sentences of positivity. Oh, high riser, my little loaf. Jumpy as a Mexican bean, you know, a clean slate with all the positive and the negative pushing into some sort of balance, you know, the yin and the yang of being a baby. So I believe that this poem, I don't feel comfortable in saying that Sylvia is writing a jealous poem about her baby, but I think it's the comparison of the life of a womb, you know, of generally very relaxing place in the minds of many people. That kind of imagery compared to the sort of harsh struggles of everything going outside of this little space. It brings some sort of it brings a contradiction to everything going on, and this is something that Sylvia is writing about here, about her child, about her feelings with that specifically, and how she perceives the child, because that goes back to the beginning of the sentence. You are clown-like. You are jumpy as a Mexican bean. These are all the things that you are as a baby in the womb, and yet you're still a clean slate. Because all of this is true, And none of this is true because we have no idea what's going on with that child. Because the only thing that it goes back to is the idea of being vague as fog. That's the mind of a child, unknowing of what's going on, sitting in the dark, wrapped up in yourself like a spool.